Our recording. Welcome to our Unit 12 live session for critical thinking. Oh, Helen, you can't hear me? I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe you want to try to go out and then come back in. I'm not sure why you can't hear me. It sounds like other people can hear me. At least Shantae can hear me because she heard Billie Eilish. All right, welcome to class. Let's get started with our normal beginning of the class announcements related to what it is you got to do for class this week. I have pulled up our Blackboard course page. I'm going to head to course content. We're in Unit 12 right now, y'all. Scroll all the way down. Right here, the stuff about overconfidence and social pressures. It's the final week of our cognitive bias section. So we'll be learning a bunch of stuff. We'll also be catching up on some of the math stuff that we were supposed to do last week. I think we'll be fully caught up, or most of the way towards caught up, by the end of our live session today. I'm psyched for it. We've got 3 readings for class today, none of which are particularly long. One's a nice short one on certainty and confidence. Another one's about the pressures from social forces on us. And final one is a little short excerpt from something called Lies We Tell Kids related to identity. And it's literally just a page, that one. So not too much reading for class this week that's required. There is a cool reading that's optional if you want to take a look at that one as well. Here's your assignment for class this week. All you have this week is a discussion board. No participation activity for class this week. No homework, no tests, no anything else. Just a discussion board. And I'm going to treat this like a traditional discussion board, where I'm going to look for 3 total posts in this week's discussion board. An initial post due Saturday and 2 replies due by Wednesday. And I'll grade this the way I graded discussion boards way back earlier in the semester. If you remember, I wanted you to space out your posts over 3 different days, try to contribute throughout this coming week. This is on the topic of I'm specialism. It's the second big thing we'll be talking about in class today. You probably don't know this word because it's a word that I made up. Don't worry about it. We'll learn what I'm specialism is in class today. And I'll be asking you to come up with examples of instances where maybe you personally have exhibited I'm specialism. I'll be giving my own examples from my own life where I exhibited I'm specialism. And I want you to think about those sorts of examples. An instance in your own life and an explanation for how it relates to I'm specialism and what you could have done to try to counteract this I'm specialist bias. So all you got to do for class this week is a straightforward discussion board. 3 posts, initial one due Saturday, 2 replies due Wednesday. That's 3 total. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Questions, thoughts, concerns about that? If you got no questions, feel free to write no questions in the chat. If you do have a question, hit that raise hand button, just unmute yourself, or write your question in the chat. Also, I'll take any questions or concerns you have about anything related to this class at this particular time. Whatever you got, whatever you're concerned with, feel free to let us know. Seems like nobody's got questions. Good to know, good to know, good to know. Cool. And I guess we've elected Barbara our spokesperson. Barbara's the only one who's going to tell us that there are no questions. Good to know. All right, so if that's the case, let's get started. Let's start talking about mathematical biases, and particularly the way in which we misinterpret random data or random patterns. So the sort of key lesson we're going to take from something I asked you all to do last week is that in general, we're bad at determining which patterns we see in our lives are random and which patterns are not. So remember last week, your assignment was this coin flip activity where I asked you to make up a random sequence of 20 coin flips in your mind, like this: heads, tails, heads, heads, tails, continuing on down to a total of 20 fake coin flips. Then I wanted you to actually flip a coin 20 times and record the results, something like heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, etc. And then what I asked you to do is post your two lists in the Unit 11 discussion board, and I tried to guess which one you made up in your mind and which one came from actual coin flips. Let's take a look at how I did, by the way. I did, in fact, take a look at every single one of your posts for those of you who did it. Here we go. I'm going to switch over to right here. And not to brag, but take a look here. Shanae's, I got right. Amanda's, I got right. Franco's, I got right. 3 for 3, y'all. Leah didn't tell me. Leah, if you're here right now, feel free to tell me if I got it right or not. William, I got right. 4 for 4, y'all. Courtney didn't tell us. Let us know right now, Courtney, if I got the right ones, if I guessed right.
Yeah, you did.
All right, 5 for 5, y'all. How am I doing this? Ooh, here's one I actually got wrong. I did mention that this one was tricky. So I'm not perfect, but right now I'm 5 for 6. That's pretty good of me. Shantae told me whether I got this one right or not. Shantae, did I get yours right? I'm not sure if you're here right now. Let's see. Yeah, Shantae, you're here. Did I get this one right? Yep. Look at this. 6 for 7, y'all. How am I doing this? Am I a genius? Am I reading your mind? Najwa, you didn't tell us. I don't know if you're here. Najwa, you're here. Did I get yours right?
Wait, which one did you choose?
I said the second sequence was the one you made up in your mind, and the first one came from an actual coin flip.
Yeah.
I got it right again. 7 for 8. How am I doing this? I'm defying all probability. I should be getting half of them right, half of them wrong. Ashla, you're here. Did I get yours right? You made up the first sequence. The second one came from your mind. You think it's telepathy? Franco, that's what you actually wrote as your explanation too. You think that I'm telepathic? I would put that lower on our explanation probability. In terms of abductive reasoning, I wouldn't put that as the best explanation. Ashley, can you tell us whether I got this one right or not? I said you made up the first sequence, and the second sequence came from actually flipping a coin. Correct? What is that, 8 for 9? I'm doing real well, y'all. Olivia, are you here? Olivia is here. Did you get it right?
Yeah.
So, I did? 9 for 10.
Oh wait. Yeah, I did make the sequence.
Yes. Whoop, whoop. I don't mean to get real excited about this, but a 90% success rate is real good, y'all. Isabel, did I get yours right?
Yes, you did.
Woo! Woo! Oh, I feel so good. I'm gonna stop doing this lest you think that I do really have these magical telepathic abilities. But you see how successful I am? And again, I'm not perfect. I did get another one wrong down below here. Facundo just told me that I got his wrong. So it's not perfect, but I'm getting the vast majority of these correct. That's kind of weird and kind of freaky, right? I got Monique's right. Look at that. Anyone else want to tell me whether I got yours right or wrong? It's always exciting when you can say I got yours wrong as well. But I really want to think more about what it is I'm doing. I liked many of your hypotheses to try to explain what it is I'm thinking. I like it. Isabel's almost like a hype person for what it is I'm doing right now. How does he do that? What's going on? I love it. Shanae, go ahead and tell us what you think's going on here.
So I don't want to cheat, but you did do this last class.
Yeah, I do this in other classes, so a few of you have a little bit of a heads up on this. But go ahead.
So what he does is he looks as like if it's head, if it's like a lot of them in a row, then that's how he thinks that you flip the coin. Because in reality, when we make it up in our heads, we try to not make it as like easy as possible. So we do tails, heads, tails, heads. So that's how he does it.
Yeah, so you did a really nice job of explaining this, Shanae. You did it kind of quickly, so I'm just going to do the slower version of what Shanae just said really nicely here. So here's an example of a sequence. This is one that a student gave me earlier. And here are two sequences. The left one, I think, is a made-up sequence. And I think the right side came from an actual coin flip. And how can I tell? What Shanae just said makes a lot of sense. In sequence number 2 in particular, look at the sequence from flip number 6 to flip number 11. That is 6 tails in a row. That's a weird pattern. That feels kind of odd and unlikely. That doesn't feel random. But guess what? That actually is a random sequence. Here's a popular myth we have about random sequences of events. We think patterns like this can't exist in random sequences. Patterns like 6 tails in a row, or 6 heads in a row, or even more than 6 tails or 6 heads, can't exist in genuinely random sequences. And that's not true. In reality, short-term patterns are way more likely to occur randomly than we think. So essentially what I did is I hunted for these sorts of patterns. It didn't just have to be 6 tails in a row or 6 heads in a row. It could have been some other sort of pattern. So just to go back to what it is on these over here, I'll just show you some of my thinking with some of your actual sequences here. So this one pretty clearly has got a bunch of tails in a row, so I used that as the pattern. Let's see here. There wasn't anything that was particularly lengthy, but I did notice there were a lot of streaks of tails in a row on the bottom sequence for Shanae's, and not a lot of sequences of heads in a row on the bottom sequence. That led me to think that the bottom sequence was a little bit more patterned and less likely for somebody to make that one up. Over here for this one, I've got to always remember what it is I did. Yeah, especially when this one was a bit tricky. You made up the second sequence to the first one. Let's see. We've got HTHT, and then HHHTTT. That's kind of like a pattern at the start there. Notice I'm not concerned with one specific pattern. I'm looking for any sort of patterns. 3 H's in a row, 3 T's in a row feels kind of like a pattern of the sort that you might say, when I'm writing it, am I making up my sequence on its own? That wouldn't work. Try to see some of these others. This one just had a bunch of T's and H's in a row. That's why I did Franco's that way. Trying to see with Leah. This one I think also had some H's in a row, some strings of things. So look at what Isabel's writing in the chat right now. And I didn't mean to ignore the fact that she said I got her sequence wrong. Isabel is kind of like Shanae. She was in a class of mine last semester where I did this same activity. I repeat activities, sorry y'all, especially to you who have been in, those of you who've been in multiple classes of mine. But Isabel created some particular made up sequences that had patterns in them, purposely trying to trick me. So she did a good job tricking me. But here's what she writes right below that. If you saw someone with a really long alternating pattern, like heads, tails, 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 or something like that, what would you think? I would put that one as more likely to be the result of an actual coin flip. Because most of you in this circumstance would think that it wouldn't be exactly heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. Most of you would think it would be heads, tails, heads, 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 tails, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, tails, heads, right? You would think there'd be more of a randomness, less of a pattern in that circumstance. I also look for patterns like heads, heads, tails, tails, heads, heads, tails, tails. If I see that 4 times in a row, I'm like, that probably came from an actual coin flip. That probably didn't come from somebody's mind. And by the way, I do want to be fair to Isabel. She writes in the chat that she actually knew this ahead of time as well, even the first time that we did that. She's a rare student who's stumped me twice in this particular circumstance. It's once you know the trick, you can really stump people. And Isabel knew the trick even before taking any class of mine. I can't take any credit for teaching Isabel this important but subtle distinction in how we understand randomness. But it's amazing how effective it is. I'm at like a 90 to 90, maybe 80 to 90% success rate in guessing which one of these sequences is made up versus which one is genuinely from a coin flip. Not because I'm particularly smart, just because I know this natural facet of randomness and natural facet of how the human mind works in misinterpreting what genuinely is random. So to go back to our slides from before, there are other myths that are related to our misinterpretation of randomness that I think are important to just discuss right now. So here's another myth. This. When you put your phone on random mode or shuffle mode, whatever it is your phone happens to call it, where you just play any song in your library in random order, lots of people used to complain in their old versions of phones that their shuffle mode was busted because it would do something like play 4 Drake songs in a row, back to back to back to back to back. And somebody would be like, that couldn't happen by random chance. It looks like my phone is broken and it's playing more Drake songs than I would want by random chance. But reality is that's a streak that can and often does happen by random chance pretty often. What actually wound up happening, weirdly enough, is that companies like Apple, companies like Samsung, anybody that had a random feature, a shuffle feature on their the MP3 player, wound up hearing this criticism so often that they made their shuffle feature less random and more varied. They made it feel more random to us dummy humans who misinterpret what randomness is about. I think somebody else posted in the chat. Annoyingly, I can't see the chat and the my slides at the same time. So Isabel asked whether my accuracy for this has improved over time. My accuracy has improved on the margins, I will say. One of the things I notice, and this is a weird tendency that I've noticed over time, is that I trust patterns that exist at the end of someone's sequences less as the result of coin flips then more the result of maybe human laziness. I see a lot of times where students from basically like flip number 14 on kind of get lazy and just be like, I don't know, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. They just sort of end it in that way. And I used to interpret that as a pattern where I would say, oh, that's the coin flip sequence. But now I sometimes attribute that to human laziness. So yeah, I have been doing this probably, I think I introduced this in my classes way back in 2010. So it's this 10 years worth of me doing this dumb parlor trick. Isabel says, I don't know why whenever I shuffle a playlist, it seems like my phone plays the songs that I've added most recently to the playlist. I don't know if that is some sort of heuristic people refer to as the availability bias. Here's another version of this, Isabel. If you hear a word for the first time, or you just like learn the meaning of a word for the first time, suddenly you notice hearing that word, other people say that word all over the place in the next week or 2 weeks after you've learned that word. You're like, oh my gosh, people are using that word all over the place now that I just learned it. This is what's called an availability bias. Same thing like if you've ever bought a new car, suddenly you see that car all over the place. You're like, whoa, my Mazda Protege, they're like everywhere. I see Mazda Proteges all over the place. It wasn't an event to you before, but it might now be an event. Yeah, Barbara, you just said the exact, wow, we kismet. I love it. We've got the same exact thing. So Isabel, that could be what's going on. An alternate hypothesis, Isabel, for what's going on when you hearing songs added most recently is that maybe the algorithm in your shuffle settings on your phone is such to prioritize new music, to prioritize music you've added most recently. So that could be something that's going on as well. And I actually don't know the real answer to things like Spotify or iTunes or, I don't know, name your music service of choice. Isabel says in the chat, oh, and remember we've got two Isabels. So Isabel D was talking about the playlists. Isabel Z is now writing in the chat. I feel like with words, it's a bit more shocking because I feel like if I heard a word I didn't know, I would like look it up. So learning a new word, then hearing it soon after is kind of more surprising. Yeah, there is that sort of interesting thing about it. One thing though is that I'm just amazed at how many words people say around me that I don't know the meaning of. And it just sort of rushes past me because conversations happen so quickly, I don't have a chance to pause and look it up. Conversations happen so quickly that I say, well, I guess that word wasn't that important. I got their meaning through the rest of what they were saying. It just sort of fades in the background. But it definitely stands out as a big event when we learn it that first time. I'm going to skip down to Isabel Z since she's responding directly to what I just said. Oh, no, both Isabels are responding to what we we're just saying. So Isabel D says, I remember in high school English, we'd do vocab and we'd hear new words and we'd be like, we're never going to use these in real life. Then we hear them or read them and be like, oh, right? Yeah, so that is that interesting phenomenon. Isabel Z says, maybe it's part like context clues too. So you don't know exactly what a word means, but you don't really need to. Yeah, I think that's often what happens. If somebody uses the word lugubrious, if you just say lugubrious, people might be like, what? But if you put it in context where it makes sense, people are like, oh, that's what lugubrious means, right? You just sort of see in the context of the rest of the sentence that lugubrious has that particular meaning to it. Oh, well, do you want to know what lugubrious means? Let's look it up, y'all. That's my go-to word. Whenever I have a fancy word. Rather than me say it, mainly because I don't have full confidence that I can give you the actual definition. Looking or sounding sad and dismal, right? So you could imagine this in a real context. Someone might say like, well, of course he's looking lugubrious. He just went through a real bad divorce, right? Something like that. That might be a context where you're like, well, yeah, lugubrious probably means sad in that way. All right, back to our slides. Oh, you're thinking of legumes? Yeah, legumious. I wonder if that's a word. Legumious? Or maybe there's sort of a root behind all of that, where somebody back in, I don't know, what would that be, ancient Greece? We're looking at beans and we're like, beans are kind of like frowning. Beans are sad. And maybe there's like a root to both of those. Who knows? Language is weird, y'all. They're kind of frowning. Yeah, I buy that. All right, so let's do a couple more myths. This is a more advanced myth that I'll talk about right now. You see people tout this sort of trend all the time. They'll say, I'm a great investor. I look at the market and I'm a stock trader. I analyze trends. I've made money in the stock market 10 years in a row. You gotta trust me. You gotta know I'm a good investor. With a track record like that, I can't fail. But in reality, that totally can be luck. There's a whole book by a guy named Nicholas Nassim Taleb that's called Fooled by Randomness. He himself was a trader before he became a popular book writer slash just sort of general public intellectual, where he argued that so many people were fooled by their own luckiness, by just being some of the lucky few who succeeded by random chance. Think about it. If there are, I don't know, 20,000 people trading in the stock market on any given year, half of them are going to make money and half of them are going to lose money. So the next year, of those 20,000, 10,000 get to say, hey, I made money last year, invest with me. And then you go 2 years down the line, and of those 10,000 who made money first year, 5,000 of them are going to also make money in the second year. 5,000 of them won't, but you still have 5,000 people just by random chance who get to say, I've made money in the stock market 2 years in a row. Then you go to 3 years, 2,500 of them will have made money 3 years in a row. 4 years, 1,250 of them will have made money 4 years in a row. 5 years out, 625 of those people will have made money by random chance alone. 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, you're still going to have a few dozen people making money 10 years in a row just by random chance. And it looks like that couldn't be due to random chance. That couldn't be luck. That's got to be somebody who knows the market and who's really, really smart. And sure, there probably are some people who are really smart. But how can you tell apart the really smart people playing the market from the people who just randomly got lucky? It's hard to do. Random chance, that could in fact happen. And as Isabel also says, there is a general positive trend in the stock market. You do have to wonder about specific events, like something like the 2008 financial collapse, or more recently in 2020, we had a similar collapse, mostly surrounding COVID-19. There are those sorts of downturns, but in general, as Isabel writes in the chat here, the stock market generally goes up. And in many of those last 10 years, you would expect just by random chance alone to follow the trends of the stock market, which is generally going up. So, yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we also have this long timeline. If you look at the entire year of 2020, maybe within, from say March to, I don't know, September, there was a dip, but going back up from September to maybe December, looking forward, not if I can prognosticate. There might be a return back up to its prior levels. These are all important concerns to raise within this. One more myth along this that's a little bit more perhaps related to us here. I might think to myself, wearing my lucky hat helps the Philadelphia Eagles win their football game. This is a classic sort of sequence that I might notice, and I might say like, hey, the last like 4 times I wore my lucky hat, the Eagles won. And that one time I didn't wear the hat because I wasn't at home, I didn't have my hat with me, the Eagles lost. Well, in reality, that lucky hat winning streak is almost certainly due to random chance. And this is a particular random chance due to that availability bias we were talking about earlier, that where you might notice the times it worked and forget about the times that it didn't work. You might forget all the times the Eagles won when you weren't wearing the hat, or conveniently forget all the times the Eagles lost when you were wearing the hat. You only remember the times that confirm what it is you're believing. This is confirmation bias again, what we were talking about last week. You're accepting the information that confirms your superstition in your lucky hat, and you're forgetting all the times that you've got disconfirming evidence against your superstition. So Facundo mentions this in related to a palm reading or horoscope. You could see somebody doing this who seriously believes in palm readings and horoscopes, having all of the information that's correct being uncritically accepted and confirming what it is they already believe. And any information that's incorrect within that palm reading or horoscope gets reinterpreted or forgotten or critically rejected for, well, that's obviously a mistake for this reason. Don't worry about it in this sort of circumstance. Isabel writes in the chat as well, losing with the lucky hat on, reacting like, oh darn, I guess the lucky hat couldn't save him this time. It can only help so much, right? Yeah, you're like, well, it's not going to work 100% of the time, but maybe just 90% or something. Yeah, maybe it boosted their score than it otherwise would have been, right? Yeah, like they would have lost even more if I hadn't worn the hat, something like that. Yeah, good instances all. And one final myth along this line, sometimes you might dream about something and like suddenly something really freaky happens that's related to your dream. I dreamt about my old friend who I haven't thought about in years, and suddenly out of the blue, she just texted me today. What are the odds? Weirdly enough, the odds are higher than you might think by random chance alone. In general, when a weird thing happens, your typical first reaction is something like, what are the chances? What are the odds? That's got to be so low. And more often than not, the odds are higher than we think by random chance alone. 6 tails in a row occurs not super likely, but more likely than we think. Random sequences like this happen a lot. And I saw this. Just go down the list on the discussion board from Unit 11 to see all of your actual coin flips and see how many times there are 5 tails in a row or more, 5 heads in a row or more. You might not think that feels random, but in actuality, it does. So the upshot of all of this is that we confuse the 2 closely related concepts of randomness and variety, and they don't mean the same thing. A made-up sequence is a varied sequence where you are intentionally, deliberately trying to make sure there are no patterns in that sequence. You are on purpose making it so that there's no pattern. That is not what a random sequence is. There is no deliberate intentionality to randomness. A random sequence is just a sequence of independent events, where each event in it is independent. But short-term patterns can and often do emerge in random sequences. Variety is where you break up those sorts of patterns. If somebody were looking at sequence number 2, where there were 6 tails in a row, and they were trying to make a varied sequence, they would mix it up, and they would be like, you know what? Throw a couple heads in there between 6 and 11 just to break up that pattern. You're deliberately messing with the independence of that sequence, though. Once you do that, you're saying the fact that 6, 7, and 8 are all tails means that 9 shouldn't be tails. Now 9 is no longer an independent event. 9 depends on the events that happened before it. And a larger way of describing this, if you want to talk like a stat nerd, is that in general, humans are bad at distinguishing signal from noise. We're bad at determining what's signal, which is actual statistical patterns that aren't due to random chance alone, genuine statistical correlations, as opposed to noise, which is the short-term patterns that are explainable by random chance alone. The variety that happens in randomness is sometimes variety that can look like intentional statistical patterns, but are actually just random. We don't do a great job of distinguishing correlations from coincidences. It's one of the things we talked about earlier this semester when we discussed both inductive arguments. Do we actually have a good enough sample size that's representative, that represents a genuine generalization? And for causal arguments, we talked about drawing causal conclusions from correlational data. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is that the correlations we're discussing in our premises are genuine correlations, not spurious coincidences. All right. So that's done for those slides. What I'm going to do now is switch over to some other slides to talk about some other sort of related math biases that also have to do with this idea about odds and percentages. So I'm going to ask you a few questions right now. And actually, I'll just jump on down right to here. I'm going to do this in the form of a poll. Turn on a poll here. The question on this slide says, what are the chances one person in this classroom shares a birthday with someone else in this class? I guess we're not physically in person, so I guess I should change that to live session. There are 19 of us right now in this particular live session. What are the chances someone shares a birthday with someone else among us 19? Do you think it's about 1%? Do you think it's about 5%? Do you think it's about 25%? Do you think it's about 50%? Or do you think it's about 100%? Go ahead and vote in this poll right now. Only got 3 of you who have voted so far. 4 of you so far have voted for 5%, 1 for 1%, 2 for 25%, 3 for 50%, 0 of you have voted for 100%. We're up to 7 for 5%, 2 for 25%, 3 for 50%. Now no votes for 1%, no votes for 100%. Keep voting, y'all. The one that's getting the most votes seems to be 5%. 8 of you are voting for 5%. And then a few others are voting for 25% and 50%. We've got 3 for 25%, 2 for 50%, 4 for 25%. All right. So let me show the results right here. We've got about 8 of you at 5%, 4 of you at 25%, 2 of you at 50%, none of you at 0%, sorry, at 1% or 100%. So let's try to look at the actual answer on this one. The real answer, weirdly enough, is about 50%. So only 2 of you got it right on this one. It's because there are only 19 of us, it's a little bit under 50%, probably closer to about 40%. But I was expecting us to have roughly around 23 of the 30 students in here. And once you get 23 students in a room together, the probability that one of us shares a birthday with someone else is 50%. Isn't that weird? Doesn't that feel intuitively unlikely? Like, no, it's not 50%. It's not that high. Isabel says that she's done this at camp and it's wild. Olivia started at 50% and then changed her answer. Sorry about that. Barbara's got 6 people out of 17 of you who have the same birthday at your job. That is interesting. A little, what are the chances? It'd be fun to try to calculate the odds of something like that happening. But let's actually try this right now. Let's try to figure out whose birthday is who. It's really fun when there's a room with like 100 people because you're almost guaranteed at that point. It doesn't even have to be that many. By the time you get to 50 people, your odds are like 99%. 99.9% with 70 people. Once you get to 100, it's like, it would be weird if there isn't a person. So I'm gonna start, my birthday is August 9th. Anybody share a birthday with me? Let me know. Anaya's birthday is January 17th. Let us know if you share a birthday with Anaya. Shantae's got January 27th, close to Anaya. Isabel's close to me at August 1st. Isabel Z is at December 13th. Shanae's July 24th. Emma's April 3rd. Amanda's September 13th. Najua's December 3rd. We've got a lot of people who are 10 days away from each other. March 30th for Barbara, October 24th for Courtney, July 17th for Ashley. Facundo's March 18th. Doesn't look like any matches yet. Franco, what's your birthday? Who else hasn't said anything? Courtney, Deshawn. Have we heard from Helen or Iris? I'm not sure. Monique. All right. I don't see. We've only heard from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of the 20 of us in this room right now. I want to hear from the other 6. These are also the same people who probably participated in the poll. Where's William at? The more people we have, the more likely we are to get this. It's not letting you pick. Can you just write your birthday down? All you have to do, don't worry about participating in the poll. March 6th. Ooh, we got 3 March birthdays in here. That's something. June 26th for Deshawn. You're the only June birthday so far? Yeah, you're the only June birthday. So just to sort of spell out the math on this, why this feels counterintuitive, like that's not a chance. You just don't realize how many opportunities there are for there to be a match. So when there are 20 people in the room, you might think like, oh, the chance that I match with someone else in the room is still pretty low. The chance that I say match specifically with Deshawn is pretty easy to calculate. It's 1 out of 365 because there are 365 days in the year. I guess you could also add the leap year of the leap day of February 29th. Every 4 years, there's that. So I guess it's 1 out of 365 and a quarter. Because that's the chances. And then the chance that I match with someone else in this room is 20 out of those 365 days. 20 out of 365. Still pretty low, still less than 1%. But it's not just me that has a chance to match. Because if I don't match, then Amanda has 19 chances to match with everybody else. She already didn't match with me, but she could match with Anaya or Ashley or Barbara or Franco or Shante or Courtney or etc. so on. And so that's now 20 chances plus 19 chances. And if Amanda doesn't match, Anaya has a chance to match with 18 of y'all. Again, Anaya is already not matched with me and not matched with Amanda, but Anaya could match with Ashley or Barbara or Franco or Shante. So that's 20 plus 19 plus 18 chances. We're just under we're at like 57 chances now. And if Anaya doesn't match, Ashley's got a chance to match with 17 of us. And if Ashley doesn't match, Barbara's got a chance to match with 16 of us. And if Barbara doesn't match, Franco's got a chance to match with 15 of us. And so on and so forth down the line. So this starts to add up pretty quickly. So the real chances are 20 plus 19 plus 18 plus 17 plus 16 plus 15 all the way down to 1. Now we're talking about hundreds of chances. And as soon as you get up to 23 people in a room together, 23 people in a live session together, the chances are now a lot higher, greater than 50%. You have a better than 50% chance. We should be slightly under 50% at this point, probably around 40%. And even with all of us not contributing, it should be even lower. When there are only roughly 10 to 12 of us contributing, it should be an even lower chance. But surprisingly, it's higher than you might think, just by random chance alone. Weird, creepy. All right, let's move on to another one. Suppose two strangers strike up a conversation with each other on a plane trip. Remember, these are strangers, and they wind up discovering that the husband of one of them was in a tennis camp run by the acquaintance of another. Right, so in this particular case, the poll is, what are the chances that two strangers know someone in common? Is it about 100%? Is it about 50%? Is it about 20%? Or is it under 1%? Good question, Isabel. Just talking about two strangers in general know someone in common. What are the chances? So I've started a new poll. Go ahead and start telling us your thoughts on this one. We got 7 votes for 20%, 1 vote for 1%, 2 votes for 50%, 1 vote for 100%. Holding steady at those rates, people aren't responding more. For the sake of time, I'll show the results. Most of you voted for 20%. That's 7 of you. 3 of you voted for 50%, and only a vote each for 1% and 100%. All right, so let's talk through the actual answer on this. Right answer to this one, weirdly enough, is close to 100%. Isn't that creepy? Two strangers on a plane have about a 100% chance of knowing someone in common. You might feel really freaked out by this percentage right now. You might be like, no, that's gotta be BS. What are you talking about? The chances have gotta be lower than 100%. Well, let's run through the simple math on this. Let's just restrict our strangers to adults. There are roughly 200 million adults in the United States. Let's say these are strangers who are both in the United States. They're on a plane trip together. Each stranger probably knows about 1,500 people. You might think that's a high number, but if you actually rack through your brain of acquaintances, not people you know really well, but just people you know in general. I'm talking about your 7th grade social studies teacher. And that babysitter of yours that you only had as a babysitter twice. And that person that you had a few conversations with at that gas station because you kept going to that gas station for gas when you were a senior in high school. Like all those randos. That's about 1,500 people in your life. Just running the math on this, if you pick 2 random selections of 1,500 people spread across 200 million people. So what would happen in this case is you'd pick a random selection of 1,500 from 200 million, then put those 1,500 back and pick another second random selection of 1,500 people, the chance that there's an overlap of at least one person in common from those two random selections of 1,500 is basically 100%. It's like 99.999%. Just by random chance alone. And that's what we're doing when we are saying two strangers are sitting next to each other. What are the chances they know someone in common? This one stranger has a network randomly of 1,500 people. This other person as a stranger has a random network of another 1,500. The chance that there's an overlap of one is almost guaranteed. And by the way, what Isabel writes in the chat also further increases the odds, although it doesn't impact them as much as you might think, but it does make it more likely. There's a good chance that two people on a plane are going to and or from the same places. So they're fairly likely to have connections somewhere in the vicinity of each other. Yeah. So they might both live in the same area, right? If both of them are going to, say, the Newark airport, chances are they live near Newark. So their acquaintances are going to also be skewed towards Newark. Even if they're not living from the same place, the fact that they're on a plane suggests that, like, at least both of them know people in Newark, or both of them know people in the, like, other place. Let's say they're both going to, like, Salt Lake City, Utah on this plane trip. They both know people in both of those places, also increases their odds. So it's even more likely than two random Americans, as Isabel is suggesting here. Isabel says that, this is Isabel D now in the chat. I live in a small town, but I see this all the time where everyone literally knows everyone else somehow. Yeah, I also just refer to this now as the Facebook effect. If you've ever just friended somebody on Facebook and then seen the friends you have in common, it can sometimes freak you out where you're like, wait a minute, you know Antonia too? How do you know Antonia? I know her from this completely other random separate part of my life, not the way that I met you. How do you know Antonia and I know Antonia? So the weirdness in this scenario is not that they know someone in common, but that they found out. The discovery in this story is the weird thing. The chance that you'll discover this is kind of low. The chance that there is an acquaintance in common is very, very high. All right, let's do another version of this. This is question number 3. Suppose you have a vivid dream of a fiery car crash the night before your uncle wraps his Ford around a power pole. What are the chances in this sort of circumstance that your dream weirdly predicts the future? Or your dream in some sense comes true? Are the chances less than 1%, 15%, about 70%, about 100%? Yeah, so in this case, let's just zoom out so that it's less about the specific and more about the generic claim of you having a dream that predicts the future. Yeah, I don't actually have an Uncle Mortimer myself. I just made that name. Let's see those votes though. What are the chances you have a dream at some point and it creepily predicts the future? For those of you voting, we've got about 4 votes for 1%, 2 votes for 15%, 3 votes for 70%, and 1 vote for 100%. All right, so this is an interesting split. We got 4 votes for 1% and 4 votes for 70%. Not that many votes for 15%, only 1, and not that many votes for 100%. So this is bimodal, interestingly. We've got conflicting intuitions among us who are voting. A bunch of us think it's pretty unlikely at 1%, and the other bunch of us think it's more likely, like 70%. Maybe some of you are starting to read the tea leaves of this particular class and this particular lesson we're trying to draw from this, where you're saying, well, 70%, because it's just higher than we think. In this case, the correct answer, though, is even higher than any of you were predicting. I guess one of you got it right, but the right answer in this one is about 100% as well. What? Are you kidding me? What? What are you talking about, Sean? This seems absolutely batty. But let's talk through this. Let's say the real chances of randomly having a matching dream are pretty darn low. It's 1 in 100,000 chances. If that's the case, then 3.6% of the people who dream every night are going to have a predictive dream once a year. Most of those dreams won't match reality at all. But 3% of the time each year, somebody's going to have a dream that predicts the future. If that's the case, in the United States, there are going to be millions of these dream occurrences each and every year. Thank you for saying that's wild, Facundo. I agree that it's wild. I feel like the really weird part is that it's the night before, though. Yeah, so the weird thing about this is what we count as a matching dream. Is it the night before, or would it also count as a matching dream if you have it 2 nights before or a week before? And notice whether this counts as a match or not also depends on how you're interpreting this. The dream isn't necessarily specifically about Uncle Mortimer. The dream is just about a fiery car crash. And by the way, Uncle Mortimer's car crash might not have been fiery. It might just have been a crash into a pole. It might not have had fire associated with it whatsoever. But this is counting as a match in our dreamer's mind because it's a dream about a car crash and my uncle got in a car crash. All sorts of things would have counted as a matching dream that isn't Uncle Mortimer specifically crashing into a power pole. Any sort of, let's say it wasn't even a car crash, but somebody's car got set fire to. Our dreamer probably would have said, I just dreamt about a fiery car last night. So weird. Or if it happened a week later, I just dreamt about a fiery car crash, like real recently. If it wasn't Uncle Mortimer, but it was someone else, it would still count. If it was the person dreaming themselves and not their uncle, it would have felt like it counted even more. And by the way, I like what Isabel's saying, that Isabel can recollect some dreams vaguely from years ago, too. Yeah, and it might only be that sort of vague, hazy things. I know I have had dreams that have weirdly matched the future, that have seemed to have come true. And I bet many of you have as well. How many of you have had a dream where you're like, oh, actually, my dream did come true? How many of you have had matching dreams like this? Go ahead. I didn't see whose hand was raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself, whoever just raised their hand. Go ahead, Anaya. Tell us your example. So Anaya, what actually happened? Oh, you were just raising your hand and saying like, yeah, that's happened to me. I see. You didn't want to say an example. Mm-hmm. This is a thing that happens, and it happens more often than we might think. It's actually just more common an event than we might think by random chance. Oh, Isabel, Z's dreams tend to be pretty abstract, so you don't think you remember any coming true. Yeah, I see that makes sense as well. There's also other things that have to do with priming. I know that my mom, shortly after I introduced my mom to the woman who was eventually going to become my wife, at that time, she was just a woman I was dating, but it was serious enough that I was like introducing this woman to my parents. My mom said, wow, you know what? Right after I met Maggie, I had a dream that I was at a wedding and I was dreaming that you two were getting married. And wouldn't you know it? A couple years later, you two wound up getting married. And that might sound like a classic like dream that predicts the future sort of thing. But also think about the scenario and how primed my mother was to be thinking about that. I was introducing my mother to a woman I was seriously dating within the sort of general circumstance of, hey, this is somebody I care about seriously, and I'm dating seriously enough that I'd like to introduce them to my parents. That's a classic scenario where a mom's thoughts run right to, oh, maybe they might get married. They could get married. Marriage might be in the future for this sort of circumstance. So that sort of dream is almost primed, almost like the sort of thing you would expect to happen when you're thinking that sort of way. Emma's got a good example in the chat here. Emma writes, a friend of mine and her mom had a dream that her grandma was going to get in a car accident and die from not wearing a seatbelt. Next day, she got in an accident, and the only reason she survived was because she had a seatbelt on. Interesting in this case, notice how creepily parts of that story match, but also how interestingly one relevant bit doesn't match. The not wearing a seatbelt versus wearing a seatbelt. And then how that's interpreted as a match because she would have died but for the fact that she wore the seatbelt. The seatbelt saved her. Interesting in that sort of case how we would count that as a match, even if that's not a perfect match of the sort. Excellent, excellent example. And then we've got one last question I want to pose on this one, just to move on to this. Oh, Facundo says, is this a skewed statistic in a way with regards to our dreams being filled with those we encounter in our lives you begin with? I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying about those we encounter in our lives you begin with. Like you're saying the sorts of dreams we dream about are often things we might encounter in our regular life to begin with, or we would expect to happen or be dreaming about. I could see something along the lines of that, in the same way that I was talking about my mom having a dream about a wedding shortly after what I was introducing my bride-to-be in that circumstance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, projections in that sort of way. I could see that, yeah. Mm-hmm. Again, that's not to say that dreams are always literal in this fully strong way. My dreams are often esoteric in much the way it sounds like Isabel Z's dreams are. But here we go. We've got one last question I want to pose to you all as a poll here. Suppose you are picked to take a half-court shot in basketball during halftime of a basketball game. You're given one chance to do this, and somehow you make the shot. What are the chances? What are the chances you make a half-court shot in basketball? Are they about 2%? Are they about 20%? Are they up to about 50%? Or are they at about 100%? Last time I'm going to ask you to take a poll today. Go ahead and put down your answers now. I've got 3 votes for 50%, 1 vote for 2%, 1 vote for 100%. Got 8 votes for 50%. Nobody's voting for 20%. Still 1 vote for 2% and 1 vote for 100%. By far the most popular answer is 50%. I love what Shantae said, you either miss or make it, so it's 50%, right? Interestingly, this shows off a different type of mathematical bias that I want to talk about right here. So for those of you who go into 50%, I just want to tell you right now, the answer is not 50%. I'm not going to tell us what the real answer is among the other 3 for a couple minutes. But the answer isn't 50% because you're doing something that people refer to as like the either or bias. People refer to this as maybe like the false dilemma, or just the assumption that if there are 2 possibilities and only 2 possibilities, that each possibility is equally likely. And that's just simply not the case. When there are genuinely 2 possibilities, it still could be the case that one is way more likely to happen than the other. So let's take a real extreme example of this. You buy a lottery ticket. What are the chances that that lottery ticket is a winning lottery ticket? In most circumstances, the chances are astronomically low for any lottery ticket that you buy. Even though you could say the same sort of reasoning, well, you either have a winning ticket or you have a losing ticket. So I guess it's like 50-50. No, the vast majority of lottery tickets lose. If millions of people have bought a lottery ticket for the same lottery, and there's only one set of numbers that's the winning numbers, then most of those tickets are losing tickets, and only one in those millions of tickets is a winning ticket. So there's really more like 1 in several million chances that you're going to win, and something more like 999 million out of a billion chances that you're going to lose. And Olivia says there are, in fact, people who have won the lottery twice, and they are very interesting, major, newsworthy events. And you might think it makes no sense, but randomness is weird like this. This is how randomness works. You'll hear stories in the news of very unlikely events that makes you maybe think that these unlikely events are more likely to happen than they actually do. But it's just because there aren't news stories about people who lose the lottery. Nobody writes a news story or goes on TV to cover all the people who lost the lottery yesterday. But if somebody happens to win the lottery twice, you better believe people are going to write news stories about them. So try to avoid falling for this 50-50 bias. I see this a lot with this half-court shot, that this is something that people say. But before we answer this particular question about the half-court shot, I want to talk a little bit about beer pong. In particular, these sorts of beer pong trick shots that maybe you've watched on YouTube or seen various places. These are just 3 animated GIFs or GIFs, however you want to talk about them. I don't have a bone to pick in the pronunciation of that word, of what are genuinely impressive beer pong trick shots. People are taking table tennis balls and doing some real fancy stuff with it so that that ball or multiple balls wind up in a solo cup in a real awesome way. Very, very impressive. Except I don't think it's that impressive, and I want to tell you why. It's the following quote right here. Given a long enough timeline, improbable events wind up being very probable. This principle, I think, governs lots of our misunderstandings when it comes to math and probability that we've been discussing this past however long we've been discussing things. So if you have some sort of sequence, just to go down to here, like 10 heads in a row with a coin flip. If I ask you to just flip a coin 10 times, the chances you're going to get 10 heads in a row is pretty darn unlikely. Chances are there's going to be at least 1 tails in that sequence. It's 2 to the power of 10, which is a pretty strong number. It's astronomically unlikely. But if I say flip a coin 1 million times, and is there a chance that somewhere in that 1 million flip sequence, there are 10 heads in a row? Now the chance of there being 10 heads in a row in that sequence is incredibly likely. Just by random chance alone, we've just given it way more likely, way more chances to happen. And Facundo asked where this quote comes from. I don't know if it actually is a quote from someone. Feel free to Google it. I could try to Google it right now real quickly. I think it's just like a statistical principle that I'm appealing to at this point. Let's see. Yeah, so I think it looks like I literally stole it from The Onion. Now, if you want to, I will pull this up right now. Let's see here. Where did it go? The Onion is the satirical news site some of you might have heard of before. But they've this is a classic riff on this statistical principle. Cornell drains fun out of a Cinderella run by explaining how on a long enough timeline, the improbable becomes probable. So we're talking about a made-up event in a basketball tournament where Cornell is talking about this sort of randomness. Anyway, who cares? So I don't think it's an actual quote from anyone of substance. It's just follows this general statistical principle we're discussing. But here's something you could look up that's closely related to this. So I guess it's a quote I said just now. Yeah, I wouldn't attribute it to me though. It's not like I came up with this idea. I'm just regurgitating other people's ideas here. None of this is original to me. This is somebody else's idea though. It's called the infinite monkey theorem. You can Google this and there is a Wikipedia article on it and there's lots of people who talk about it. Here's the sort of principle. The principle of this long enough timeline probables, improbable events become probable gets spelled out in this fanciful thought experiment. Imagine you give a literally infinite number of monkeys an infinite number of typewriters and ask each one of them to just randomly bang on the typewriter. They're not capable of writing actual English sentences. They don't understand English. They can't read English. They can't write English. They're just randomly banging on the keys. Well, most of them will produce absolute nonsense, right? Most of them will produce stuff that looks like this. That's what most of the typewriters will produce when you give monkeys this. But if you're giving literally an infinite number of monkeys, all these typewriters, by sheer random chance, one of them is going to write what looks like a word-for-word recreation of Shakespeare's Hamlet, of the play written by Shakespeare, Hamlet. It's not that this is something that we're dealing with a really smart monkey. This is just purely by random chance alone. Most of these sequences will be just nonsense, but by random chance, one of them will write, by sheer coincidence, the work of Hamlet. And by the way, it's way more monkeys than we need on that exist on the planet. It doesn't have to be literally an infinite number, but it has to be a sufficiently large finite number. Like more monkeys than exist on planet Earth right now, maybe like more monkeys than there are like grains of sand on a particular beach. Like it's got to be an astronomically high number of monkeys. But once you get to that many number of monkeys, you're just going to exhaust all the various permutations that are possible to randomly get when you bang on a keyboard at random. And that's the fulfilling of this particular idea of improbable events become probable when you give them enough chances to occur. An application of this real quickly is to think about the conditions of life on planet Earth. So right now, Earth is uniquely situated in a what seems like an astronomically low chance for life to survive on it. We need a source of energy, and we're just the right distance from the sun to have solar energy. We also have the internal energy coming from the core of the Earth being hot and radioactive decay from various things that exist on Earth. We need a way to distribute that energy in a way that it gets to all living things. And nutrients are a wonderful way of doing that. Water is a great way to get nutrients to spread from various things. So I'm sure you're familiar with how our life cycle works in this sort of way. You take some sort of living thing and it eats things like, let's say an animal eats plants, and then that animal poops out some of the stuff that it didn't use, and that poop gets to be useful as fertilizer, right? As something that helps, because there are nutrients in that poop for the soil. And then that soil becomes richer so that the plants can continue to grow. And by the way, when animals themselves die, those animals decomposing will create things that are helpful for soil as well. And then that helps replenish things so that it all cycles through again. We got to make sure that Earth has killer protection. There are so many things out there in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe, that if you expose it to humans or other living things, these living things just die. X-rays, gamma rays, all of those sorts of things are deadly to us, microwaves. Well, our ozone layer and our atmosphere does a great job of protecting us from this sort of stuff that's just bouncing around in space. We got to make sure the temperature is just right for life to exist. If Earth were a little bit closer to the sun, Earth would be way too hot for life to exist here. If Earth were a little bit further away from the sun, Earth would be way too cold. It's got to be in that just right sliver right there in the middle. So we basically got everything just right. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Not too harsh, not too soft, just right. What are the chances? Well, here's where we can start talking about the probable improbability of all of this. How many stars are there in a galaxy? There's like 1 trillion of them. How many galaxies are there in the universe? That's, by the way, just 1 trillion stars in one single galaxy. In our Milky Way galaxy, there are 1 million stars. In any other galaxy you can name, there are 1 trillion stars. There are over 100 billion galaxies in the universe. So think about how many actual stars there are. It's that number at the bottom of the screen right there. It's a 1 followed by 23 zeros. That's 100 sextillion stars. And think about how many planets there might be orbiting any one given star. You're talking about that many chances. That is trillions of chances. That's an astronomically high number of chances. So if you ask a question, what are the chances this one planet we're on right now, Earth, is just right for life? You might think, well, obviously the chances are low. But what if you reframe the question as, what are the chances there's some planet out there that's just right for life? The answer to the first question is low, but the answer to the second question is high, because now we're dealing with a probable improbability. Since there are probably more than 100 sextillion planets, the chances one of those 100 sextillion planets is just right for life is high. And as Isabel also writes in the chat, importantly, we're even just assuming that there are narrow conditions for life, that they have to match life as we know it here on planet Earth. And there might be a wider range of possibilities, a wider range of temperatures, a wider range of creatures that maybe are totally fine with gamma rays, that aren't hurt by gamma radiation or something like that. This relates back to what the question we asked earlier in our live session today. What are the chances your dream last night predicted the future? Well, anytime you have one dream, that chance is really low. But what if you say, what are the chances one of your dreams predicts the future? Because think about how many times you dream. Particularly if you dream frequently, you're dreaming every night. You're dreaming every time you go to sleep. You might be dreaming multiple times if you nap during the day as well. You're talking about hundreds of times every year, thousands of times every decade, tens of thousands of times throughout your lifetime. hundreds of thousands of times throughout your lifetime. Now, the chance you had a dream last night that predicts the future is low, but the chance one of your dreams out of those hundreds of thousands of dreams predicts the future is high. And now we can finally get to answering this question. Suppose you're picked to take a half-court shot at halftime of a basketball game. The chances that you make the shot if you're given one chance is actually pretty low. There are statistics on this. People have checked this. Basically, 1 out of every 50 times, somebody makes a shot. That's a half-court shot. And for those of you who are saying it's 50%, that's an absurdly high chance. Professional basketball players have, at best, the absolute best professional basketball players have at best a 40% success rate hitting a three-point shot, which is way closer than half court. A three-pointer is like 22 feet away, 23 feet away. Half court is more like 50 feet away. So your absolute best basketball players in the world probably have more like a 20%, maybe a 30% chance to make a half-court shot. You, as a regular citizen who isn't a professional basketball player, have a much lower chance, like 2%. But why don't we try to reframe the question now? What if I told you you had as many half-court shots as you want to take? You could just spend the entire afternoon today at a basketball gym taking half-court shot after half-court shot. What are the chances you make one of those half-court shots? Shantae's going about 100%. I would bet almost certainly you're going to make one eventually. I just give you chance after chance after chance. Each individual chance is unlikely, but the cumulative effect is highly likely. This is going back to the birthday problem. Each individual chance that I say share a birthday in common with Facundo is unlikely. But if you give us a bunch of chances, I could match with Facundo or Isabel or Shantae or Anaya or Shanae or Franco, etc. And then not only could I match, but actually Franco could match with any of you. And Anaya could match with any of you. And Amanda could match with any of you. And Courtney could match with any of you. Suddenly, I'm giving it a bunch of chances to occur. And I like as Facundo says, there is an actual physical limitation with this. As long as your arms don't give up, yeah, we have to assume we give you chance to recover between half-court shots. But if you get 100, 200, 500 chances to take this shot, almost certainly by random chance, one of them will work this way. And this is something we've talked about already, but I guess we don't have to go through all this because we've already mentioned this stuff. That we just overinterpret stuff in the world. We've already mentioned this idea about the iPod shuffle setting and random coins and superstitions. The only thing I'll mention in this superstition stuff is this idea of spurious correlations where we remember all the times our superstitions worked and forget all this. I like to just remind ourselves of that. All right, so the long and the short of our mathematical biases is we don't want to oversimplify, think about things in terms of 50-50. We also don't want to ignore the amount of times or chances people have for an unlikely event to occur. When something freaky happens, like your dream predicts the future, try to remember all the times your dreams didn't predict the future. And don't leap to the assumption that you're a psychic who can see the future. Try to ground that in the reality that this was one dream you had out of thousands of dreams. And the vast majority of those thousands of dreams didn't predict the future. So just because one of your dreams did predict the future doesn't necessarily mean something psychic or supernatural was necessarily going on there. Try to remember these sorts of base rates. All right, that's going to end our conversation about math biases. Now what I want to turn to is a discussion of a new type of bias, a bias that I refer to as I'm specialism. And I want to emphasize the I in this I refer to I'm specialism because this is a word that I've totally made up. You will not find this anywhere in the literature surrounding cognitive biases, among psychologists, among cognitive psychologists or cognitive scientists. This is just my term for a phenomenon here. The only place you'll see I'm specialism out in the world is related to stuff that I've put on the internet. So don't worry about actually caring about this specific word. But the way I refer to it is, I think, helpful because it refers to this cluster of biases that lots of people give names that I don't like. So like overconfidence is one thing that people describe when they just discuss I'm specialism. And I think that only captures one aspect of this. So I want to emphasize this sort of special nature of I'm specialism. So I'm specialism is this tendency that all of us have to think that we're more unique than we might really wind up being. By the way, I know that this is bad grammar. You can't be more or less unique. Unique is literally one of a kind. So you either are unique or you are not. But I hope you get the idea of what I'm saying here. It's a tendency to think that you are unique in cases where you're not unique, or you think you're closer to being unique than you actually are, something along the lines of that you stand out in ways where you really might not fully stand out. So the positive side of this that people tend to emphasize, especially in American society, is overconfidence. You might see lots of people who might overrate their intelligence, or how hip they are, or how successful or how powerful they are, or just how in control of certain situations they wind up being. So this is the overconfident aspect of I'm specialism. And this makes it sound like all of us are arrogant, conceited jerks. And I don't think that's the case, which is why I refer to this not as overconfidence, but I'm specialism. I think here's another sort of flip side of the same coin, where people overestimate themselves, not in a positive direction, but in a negative direction. Think about how many times you might have said to yourself, oh my gosh, I am so unlucky, or I must be one of the most awkward people I've ever met. I am way more awkward than the average person, or I am so much weirder than everybody else, or everybody else seems to get it, but I'm so clueless. I'm way more clueless than anyone else. If you've ever underrated yourself, if you're underconfident in these sort of ways, you're also exhibiting I'm specialism. This is a tendency you have to think that you stick out in ways, either positively or negatively, more than in fact you might actually do. So I want to talk about this. While I'm doing this, I want to remind you of a few things. One, I want you to write about this for this week's discussion board. So while we're discussing this, I want you to be constantly thinking about instances when you might have thought in the way we're describing right now, where you might have thought you stick out in ways in which you don't actually fully stick out. And then two, I want you to also try to talk about that now during our conversation, during our live session right now. If you can remember a scenario where you were like, yeah, you know what? I was thinking that way at this point in my life earlier. Let me tell you about it. Please tell us about it now. I love hearing actual real examples of I'm specialism in action. And I'm going to get this started by telling you my own examples of I'm specialism in my own life. Remember, the thing I can't emphasize enough in this class is that this discussion of cognitive biases applies to all of us. Not just you, the students in this class, but me, the supposedly learned professor. I have all of these biases that we're discussing in here. These biases are hard to mitigate, are difficult to overcome, and just being aware of these biases isn't enough to guarantee that I will then stop having these biases. So I want to talk about all the instances in my life when I exhibited I'm specialism in this way. And first, before we do any of this, I want you all to go to this website right here as just a way to perhaps practice your confidence levels. This website right here is messymatters.com/calibration. Please go on your computer or your phone to messymatters.com/calibration. That website again is messymatters.com/calibration. You see it right here, messymatters.com/calibration. Because at this website, it's going to ask you to do something that I want you all to try right now. It's asking you questions about 10 particular things. And for each of the questions, it asks you to provide a numerical range that you are 90% sure contains the correct answer. 90% confidence. So in particular, if you have no idea, then give a wide range. If you're a little bit more confident, give a more narrow range for each of these. So these are the sorts of questions. How old was Martin Luther King Jr. at the time he died? So you don't just want to give the exact number. If you think you know the age, don't just say, oh, I think he was 45. Give a range beyond that, like, oh, maybe he was between the ages of 40 and 50, something like that. Same for all of these. Give a range. How long is the Nile River in miles? Don't just give one number. Give a number that's at the small end. It's at least this many miles. To the high end, it's at most this many miles. And then do this for all 10 of these. And then at the bottom, you can click submit, and you will find out how many of your ranges contain the correct answer. Your goal is to get 90% of your answers correct. 9 out of 10 of these correct. I want you to tell us your actual ones. I like this. Somebody actually looked up OPEC last night. Isabel, you looked up OPEC. You still don't remember it all that well? Nice. So give a wider range, even if you don't remember. Cool. I will tell you, when I did this the first time, and I didn't do this the first time when I was a college student, I did this the first time probably, I think this came out 10 years ago, right? This was, yeah, somebody posted this in 2010. So I was a philosophy professor at this time. I was teaching classes like critical thinking at this time. The first time I did this, I got 40% of my answers correct, which is way lower than 90%. And I don't mean exactly correct. I mean, my ranges, only 40% of my ranges contain the correct answers. 60% of my ranges were so off that they didn't even contain the correct answer. Oh, Isabel, you just watched Parasite? So you researched OPEC because of Parasite? Yeah, Parasite's a great movie. I would recommend you all watch that. It's a good one. I feel like a bunch of us know that since it won the Oscar last year. Your third time? Yeah, I've watched it twice. Sounds right. Mm-hmm. I remember watching it in theaters. So exciting. I forget what it's like to watch a movie in theaters. So once you click submit on this, I want you to tell me, I think it's on Hulu right now. It is on some, it's on some free streaming thing. Let me do a quick search. Yeah, I see it. It's free on Hulu if you have a Hulu subscription. So Shanae got 2 right, 20%. And Emma, you weren't even close to any of them. Were you at 0%, Emma? Isabel's got 20%. Facundo, 80%. That's the highest I've ever seen a student in one of these. Take your time, Isabel Z. Isabel D got 2 right, 20%. Facundo, congrats. You're way higher than I am. at my 40%. Don't be surprised or ashamed if your answer is like 20%, 10%, 0%. These are the common numbers I see among students in my class. We got 30% for Ashla, 10% for Emma, okay? That's very common. I appreciate your honesty, by the way, for those of you who are doing it. You didn't care about any but MLK. I like that, Shanae. Yeah, right. Some of these are kind of random, for sure. Franco got 30%. So a lot of this is stuff in miles. And Franco, there's a frustrating bias for you. Franco, you grew up in a society where kilometers was the norm for measuring distance, not miles. And kilograms as opposed to pounds. Yeah, how dare you know the metric system and not our silly English system for measurements. Facundo guessed there was like 1 to 10 books in the Old Testament. Spoiler alert, that might not be a range that includes the correct answer. Shantae got 80% as well. Go for it, Facundo and Shantae. Way to be 80%ers. That's really good. And Shantae, that's the thing you should do. You want to make your ranges large. But I bet Isabel's at 30%, okay. I bet many of you were like, well, I feel like I kind of know the range. Right, so for Shantae, you're like, well, somewhere between 1 to 100,000. Yeah, lots of these are tricky. So I know the answers now because I've been doing this for a while, but like, it's kind of sad to realize how young Martin Luther King Jr. was when he died. I bet many of you overestimated his age. And then the length of the Nile, well, like, that's a long number, but like, how long are rivers in general? Are they hundreds of miles long? Are they thousands of miles long? Are they tens of thousands of miles? We know the Nile is supposed to be a particularly long river, particularly important river, but how long is it? Tricky. This is a tricky one because many of you think like OPEC, that's got to be a large number of countries. So maybe there's like, I don't know, 50 countries, but there are only a handful of countries in OPEC. I vastly underestimated how many books there are in the Old Testament, but I felt pretty confident that I was right. I was like, I don't know, somewhere between 20 to 30. And there are way more books in the Old Testament than I remember, even though I grew up reading the Old Testament. This one's super hard to know. How wide the moon is, the diameter of the moon, I don't even know how to begin to estimate that because I don't know the diameter of Earth. And I would think that the moon's smaller than Earth. That could give me a sense, but like, I don't know how much, right? And then the weight of a particular plane. I was confident with Mozart just because I happened to study that at some point in my life. I knew he was around the 1700s. This one really freaked me out. I had no idea that Asian elephants were pregnant for more than a year. That really freaked me out. Interestingly, Franco, you knew the Nile River's length in kilometers, but then maybe the transition to miles was itself there. And I like Facundo, you just kept clicking zeros, because that's a good, like, well, it could be 0 or it could be, and then you make a big number. That's how you get more correct answers, if you just make really wide ranges. Oh, and you overestimated the length of the Asian elephant one, Isabel? Or was this the air distance from London to Tokyo? Yeah, these are all things that we're like, I'm not expecting any of you to know. Oh, the air distance one. Okay. I'm not expecting most of you to know the answers to these or to even like have a close approximation to the answer. But then this asks you to say, like, if you have no idea, give a wide range. But there's still something about this where for me, when I look at this, I'm like, oh, what's a wide range? Like 2,000 to 5,000? And that might not be in the range. I think that's a wide range, but it's not a wide enough range. I don't realize that I could be off by a factor of 10 or by a factor of 100 in some of these. Or for something like this one, I was like, well, like maybe it's like 6 months like 180 days, to a year, like 365 days. Maybe it's somewhere between 6 months and a year, not even realizing that it could be than a year. It could be even faster than 6 months. I don't know. I didn't put my error bars wide enough. This is just a general sort of tendency we have to estimate with a little bit too much confidence. Even on things where we grant ahead of time, I don't know, I have no real idea, we still might estimate in an overconfident sense. And I like what Isabel says here, you underestimated what 90% means. 90% means that 90% of your ranges will contain the correct results. So when you do 10, 9 out of those 10 should be correct, and only 1 of them should be incorrect, right? Many of your ranges are probably more like 40%, 30%, right? You had ranges that were a little bit too narrow. As Isabel writes here, like 90% should be everything you think it could be, plus some of even what you don't think, right? Yeah, I really like that way of thinking about it. Both the plausible answers and even spell it out wider to the implausible answers. Very, very well put. All right, so let's go back now to our discussion of I'm specialism. Nice job doing this. This is just a classic example of, for something that doesn't matter, us being a little bit overconfident. Us sort of estimating a likelihood in ways that might not be as strong as we think. I want to talk now about why we exhibit overconfidence, why we exhibit this I'm specialism. And before I do that, let's check out Isabel's more recent posts. Isabel writes, like, if you were paying attention to the election, the 8% odds range between a slight Trump win to a Biden landslide, it's an 80% odds range. Yeah, and within that, oftentimes you'll see confidence intervals that statisticians like Nate Silver or name your modeler or pollster of choice give. They will give confidence interval ranges of 90% or 95% of this sort. And it's just a wide range. It contains a lot of things that might be, we might think of as highly unlikely, but still within the realm of possibility. Yeah, I actually like how meteorologists talk about the world. A meteorologist will say something like, there's a 70% chance of rain today. I feel like most of us, when we hear that, will say like, oh, it's going to rain today. It's definitely going to rain. Except a 70% chance of rain means that 30% of the time it's not going to rain. That 3 out of 10 times, almost 1 out of 3 times, it won't rain when somebody predicts a 70% chance of rain. It feels like an absolute or a guarantee, but it's not as much as we think. Yeah, and by the way, Isabel does bring up a really good wrinkle about meteorologists because they're spreading 2 probabilities over each other. It's both the coverage of the area of rain and the odds that rain will happen at twice. So meteorology is doing some sort of 2-dimensional statistics at the same time. But either way, the main lesson I want to take from this is that I feel like we make fun of meteorologists a lot for classic instances of being wrong sometimes. And I think more often than not, meteorologists have a better, more statistical understanding of the world. And we do a bad job of interpreting what it is that they are telling us. When a meteorologist says there's a 70% chance of rain and we bring an umbrella with us and then it doesn't rain, we're like, stupid, silly meteorologist, you were wrong. But in fact, they told you ahead of time, 3 out of 10 times I say this, I'm going to be, it's not going to happen. 7 out of 10 times I tell you there's a 70% chance of rain, it will rain. 3 out of 10 times I tell you that, it will not rain. You didn't hear that, you heard it's gonna rain. And you now say, every time the meteorologist tells you that it's gonna rain and it doesn't, the meteorologist is wrong. but that's not a good way of interpreting what the meteorologist is doing or saying. All right, so back to this question about I'm specialism. I want to just talk about all the different reasons why people like you and me exhibit I'm specialism. One just has to do with the basic idea that we are given different information about ourselves than we are given about other people. So many people talk about this as a bias blind spot. I am not aware of my biases nearly as much as I am aware of other people's biases. Implicit biases are the exact sort of biases I'm unaware that I have. So I often compare this to like the back of my neck. I don't have the best perspective on the back of my neck because in order to see the back of my neck, I need to set up like a complicated system of multiple mirrors just to look at the back of my neck. It is hard for me to examine certain parts of myself. Biases are like that. There are many biases that are hard for me to notice about myself. But you know what? The back of other people's necks are really easy for me to see. I can totally look at other people's backs of necks, provided they're not covered up by something. And I have a great access to them. That's the same thing with biases. It's a lot easier to notice other people's biases. It's a lot easier to notice that somebody else is committing some sort of version of confirmation bias or is under the sway of disconfirmation bias. It's harder for me to notice my own confirmation bias. So this is what winds up happening. If I don't see my biases and I do see yours, I wind up assuming that I'm right because you're biased and I'm not biased whenever we disagree with each other. This is what might lead me to generally overrate myself, my own case in this circumstance. Another sort of aspect of this is a distorted perspective we just have in general. So I have more information about myself in some respects than I do about others, because not only am I capable of seeing what I do, but I'm also capable of accessing my thoughts and my reasons behind why I'm doing what I'm doing. But oftentimes when I'm looking at what other people do, I don't have access to their thoughts. I don't have access to their reasoning. I just am able to see their actions. So think about it this way. Imagine somebody cuts you off in traffic. When I see someone else cutting me off in traffic, I say, you did wrong, you're a bad person. You must be an asshole. You're a terrible, awful human. You're probably on your way to do something terrible, like kill puppies or something. That's how bad you must be to do something as bad as that. But what happens when I do wrong? What happens when I cut off someone in traffic when I'm driving? I don't call myself an asshole. I probably wind up listing all the reasons why I did that. Oh, I've been having a really stressful day and I've been distracted. I'm just sort of thinking nonstop about this fight I just had with my friend. And I'm also sort of late, so I'm rushing to get to my job. And I have all these litany of excuses that I would never think to also think that the person who cut me off in traffic has those same excuses. I like, by the way, Shanae saying you cut them back when they cut you off in traffic. And as Isabel writes in the chat very effectively here, you know why you performed your actions, but not why others do. So you're only generalizing based off of other people's actions, but we're generalizing our own character based off of our actions and our reasons, our thoughts. But interestingly, by the way, if we ever happen to do something good, you don't chalk it up to reasons beyond your control. You don't say like, I did really good on that test because I got a great night's sleep. And it just so happened to be luckily that all the questions on the test were stuff I happened to know already. I don't chalk it up to luck when I do right, I might just be like, no, I'm a good person. So this leads to a natural sort of bias that we just sort of mentioned here, where we're overrating ourselves in this way. Another sort of thing, we already mentioned this. This was a whole part of our first section of the live session today. We're bad at probability. We've already mentioned this. We might think of ourselves as a big fish in a small pond, where we think like we stand out in this one domain. And that makes us assume we're going to stand out when we zoom out to other domains. So I've got two instances of this happening in my own life, and I'd love to hear instances of this happening to y'all as well. I remember, this is full-on kid logic. When I was 5 years old, getting in a foot race with my two friends. My two closest friends and I would just like run down the street to the nearest, pole. And I remember one day I won that foot race. I literally remember thinking to myself, wow, I beat the two fastest people I know, my two other friends who are 5 years old. I'm probably the fastest person on the planet. That's obviously absurd kid logic to think that, but essentially I think we do this a lot, where we compare ourselves to a small group of people around us and overestimate our abilities if we stand out within that small subset domain, not realizing if we would go up to some sort of next level of competition, we might not stand out nearly as much. I feel like lots of people who participate in competitive activities like sports or chess or Scrabble or name your competitions thing of choice might have this happen to you, where you start standing out within one level of competition, but then when you advance to another level, you realize, oh, I might not be as good as I thought, because now everybody at this level is a little bit better and I'm standing out less. For lots of sports, this happened to me pretty quickly. Like basketball, I think I was kind of good in middle school, but by the time I got to junior high school, I was no longer that good. For some of you, maybe it happened in high school. For some of you, maybe it's happening in college with things like sports. Another example of this in my own life is things like I played table tennis growing up, and I had a ping pong table in my basement. So I remember beating a lot of my friends at table tennis. And even if they would set up a ping pong table during gym class in high school, I would do pretty well, mainly because I was probably one of the few people at my high school that even had a ping pong table where I would play ping pong a lot at my place. So when I went to grad school, I remember this was at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. I remember seeing signs for a table tennis tournament. And I went there and I was pretty confident, kind of arrogant. I was like, I'm probably gonna do pretty good at this tournament. I'm not sure I'll win it, but maybe I'll come in like, I don't know, second or third place. Maybe I'll be playing in the final game. And my first match, I got destroyed. And then it was one of these ones where you had to lose twice to be officially eliminated. I played a second match. I got destroyed even worse. We were both losers. So both of us losers were playing in that second match. And I got beat even more. Pretty much everybody at that table tennis tournament was better than I was at table tennis. And I'm not saying like I happened to go to a place, Texas Tech, that was like just a fountain of amazing table tennis talent. This was just a random college that put up a tournament, not even for people who were playing table tennis on like the college team. It was just random other people who wanted to play ping pong. And I was not nearly as good as I thought I was. I was comparing myself to my friends, the people I was randomly playing who weren't particularly interested in playing table tennis. And I overrated my ability in this way. Yeah, so Shanae, I like your example of playing basketball. You're always happy whoever won. That's definitely how I play basketball these days. I compete in the vague sense that I try to help my team win, but I don't care at all anymore who wins or who loses once a game is over. I'm legit forgetful. I don't remember who won or who lost after we play. Isabel mentions gifted programs that will highlight this sort of thing as well. And Isabel also writes about an opposite situation where she says, I had an opposite situation once where I assumed I was terrible at a certain thing compared to those competing, to the point where I was a bit scared of playing, but then I played and got third place. So I really like this as a version of I'm specialism. It's I'm specialism in that opposite direction. I keep giving examples of overconfidence, but underconfidence could also play a role. Maybe in this sort of circumstance, Isabel, you were the small fish in a big pond type of phenomenon, where you were comparing yourself to a much larger group of people who, sort of statistically speaking, might have been better at this particular thing on average. But once you actually played this thing, you were better than you realized in this comparison way. It can work in both directions. I think hyperbole often works this way as well, where rather than you saying, I am slightly below average at this thing, you will just say, I am the worst at this thing. Rather than saying, you know what, in the past month, I've had a slightly higher than usual number of unlucky events happen to me, you would say, I am the unluckiest person on the planet. We have that conflation where we don't distinguish between being at the 40% level versus at the 1% level, right? 40% is significantly below average. 1% is worst or almost the worst. But even when you're at those sorts of levels, you might still not realize the amount of probability involved. To become a professional in almost any competition, you have to be not just 1 in a million good. Because if you're in the top 1 in a million, where there is a planet of 8 billion people, that still means there are 8,000 people as good or better than you, even if you are literally 1 in a million good talent-wise. And if you are only 1 in 8,000 people good in something like, say, basketball, you're not making the NBA. There are only a few hundred professional basketball players in the United States who play professionally in the National Basketball Association. So if you're in 1 in a million territory, you're still not guaranteed to make the NBA. Naive realism is another sort of aspect of this. We just assume that our perspective on the world is the correct perspective because it's the perspective that we're being given, that our brain is automatically, our system 1 intuitive fast processing brain is providing us. If we assume our perspective's right, then we're going to, for efficiency's sake, I guess get it right enough of the time, but we might not realize all the time our perspective is not correct. Our perspective is incorrect. All right, so another reason we exhibit on specialism has to do with the other facets of our mind. Our mind is not just concerned with accurately estimating our own abilities in comparison to others. Our mind is also concerned with our mental health. And so as a basic form of wishful thinking, we might overrate ourselves or think that we're more unique in ways where we maybe aren't. We all want to change the world. We all wish we're special in some sort of way. And so we might overrate the ability to which we are special or stand out, just as a coping mechanism for our own mental health. And it does provide a sort of ego boost to us, right? And here's the way that this might influence your thinking in subtler ways than you might realize. It might not just be simply like, well, it's nice to be smart, so I'm going to overrate how smart I am. Or it's nice to be considered cool, so I'm going to overrate how many people think I'm cool. It might be the sort of twist like this. If you wind up having a particular talent or spending a lot of time on one particular pursuit, you might overrate its importance. You might wind up thinking of it as more important than it might actually be if you're a little bit less biased and had a more like neutral way of viewing all of these things. So the book that I have right here is an example of this, and you can pretty much do this for any hobby or life activity. There are books like The Fly Fisherman's Guide to the Meaning of Life. And there are other books like Why Parasailing Can Help You Live a Successful Life. And there are books that say Why Improv Comedy Saved My Life. And there are books like just name your hobby of choice, name your activity of choice. And people will say it's super meaningful, it's super important, it provides tons of life wisdom. If only everybody were a fly fisherman, then the world would be a better place. It would be more peaceful. It would be less conflict in the world, this sort of stuff. And maybe there's some truth to that, but maybe it's because of the sort of person who's reading and writing a book about fly fishing is devoting a lot of their life to fly fishing, has some particular acumen at that, so they're overrating its significance because they've spent so much time on it in the first place. I'll give you an example of this in my life. When I was younger, I was never good at all at Scrabble. There was something about the rules of Scrabble where you get a bunch of letters and you have to rearrange them into words that just like, my brain didn't work that way. So I never thought of Scrabble as any important game at all. I thought of it as a silly sort of waste of time. I did, though, play chess when I was a kid. And I don't think I was ever really good at it, but I devoted some time to it. I spent, like, if somebody asked me to play a game, I would want to play chess with them. That was something that I thought of. And in my mind, I rated chess as a much more important board game than Scrabble because I had a little bit of talent in chess and no talent at Scrabble. I didn't say this to myself at the time, but looking back, that's, I'm sure, what was going on, where something I was kind of good at, I rated as important, a true intellectual's game. Chess is a game fit for the smartest people there are. And Scrabble, that's just a silly word jumble game. That's for kids. It's not for intellectuals. Well, it turns out, if you get a little bit of distance and perspective, the sort of games we're talking about are just as intellectually challenging, just as intellectually puzzling as each other. Chess and Scrabble are different games, but challenging and intellectually rewarding in their own separate ways. And I was just underrating Scrabble because I wasn't good at it. And I was overrating chess because I had spent some time doing it. All right, so another sort of reason why you might exhibit I'm specialism are external forces on you provided by the society you live in. So in the United States in particular, we are often told growing up that we are special, that we are unique, that we are important and valued. We're raised on this sort of Barney, I love you, you love me type of mentality, where everybody is a rugged individual who can succeed and is better. It's interesting to note that this particular instance of overconfidence, the version of I'm specialism, is higher within individuals who live in Western individualistic societies like the United States and France and many European nations. than it is in more collectivist societies like China or Japan or India or West Africa, West African nations. These sorts of collectivist societies are less likely to exhibit overconfidence. They might still exhibit I'm specialism in the underconfidence direction, but they're more likely to have an accurate understanding of their limits at in the positive direction. There's also just a general politeness in our society that can't be ignored. You think about how people talk about you when they talk to you about you. They're often going to be complimentary to your face. They're often going to say nice things directly to your face. And they might be less likely to say insults, negative feedback, constructive criticism to your face, unless you have a particularly strong relationship with that person. And so you're getting an asymmetric amount of information about yourself as feedback from others. That politeness is a form of asymmetric information. I think about this myself as a teacher all the time. It is hard to get students to a place where they feel comfortable enough raising genuine constructive criticism about me and my teaching, about my class and how this class is set up. Students are way more likely to be polite to me and complimentary toward me, especially if they're thinking in the back of their mind, well, Sean is deciding my grade, so I better be kind and nice and polite to Sean so he doesn't think I'm a bad person and maybe grade me worse as a result. Right? That sort of politeness means that I'm getting very skewed feedback on how I am as a teacher. Maybe I can trust the anonymous feedback you give at the end of the semester, you know, when you have to fill out those teacher evaluations. That might be a more accurate assessment of my ability as a teacher. But if all I did was trust what you all say to me at the end of class, or what you say to my face, I might get a very one-sided perspective on this. Isabel writes in the chat a little bit about the Scrabble versus chess thing from a couple slides ago, if we can go back a little to this here. Isabel writes, that might have a societal blend to it as well, because Scrabble is mostly viewed as a casual, fun family thing, whereas chess is much more well known for its professional scene. It's heavily associated with intellectualism and stuff like that. I do think that's one of the reasons why I gravitated towards chess in the first place and ultimately dismissed Scrabble after not initially being good at it. I had society's norms on my side. Society tells us chess is awesome. Society gives us limited TV shows like The Queen's Gambit, but there is no version of The Queen's Gambit that's called like The Queen's Unscrambler for Scrabble players. I don't know if any of you watched The Queen's Gambit. I recommend it. It's a good watch on Netflix. But yeah, overall, these are the reasons why I think we exhibit I'm specialism in general. We've got these 8 reasons, and they come down to the reasons why we have biases in general in the first place. We've talked a lot about heuristics. Our fast brain doing fast processing is heuristics. We've talked before when we discussed last week about what cognitive biases are in general, about happiness, about how our mind will sometimes care more about making ourselves happy and making ourselves mentally secure and healthy than about getting things accurately correct. And we've talked about social pressures a little bit, though we'll spend more time talking about social pressures next. Social pressures is the last part of our section on cognitive biases. The one new thing that's a little bit of a wrinkle with I'm specialism is the actual unique perspective we have on ourselves. In some ways, we know ourselves worse than other people know us. And in other ways, we know ourselves better than other people know us. So we have this asymmetry that could lead to this type of distorted assessment of our own abilities. All right, and I did mention that social pressures is next, but because it's 11:40, we're kind of at the close enough to the end of class that I don't want to start a new section next. So I think we're going to just end the day. Isabel, by the way, mentions the happiness thing brings up an interesting thing, you think. I'd love to know what that interesting thing is. Let us know. I'm just going to remind you, though, of your one assignment for class this week as Isabel brings this up. Your one assignment for class this week is to post in the Unit 12 discussion board. This is a traditional discussion board. I want you to submit 3 total posts. Your first initial post should be submitted by the end of the day, Saturday, and you should reply to 2 other people in your discussion in this discussion board between Saturday and Wednesday. Space them out so they're over 3 separate days. Post at least 3 times. Make sure every one of your posts is quality. And that's it. That's all you have as an assignment for class this week. We'll end with what Isabel says here. Should we value truth over happiness is itself a question. So I don't want to weigh in on that very interesting, deep philosophical question. The reason why I bring up mental health and happiness as a concern for cognitive biases is because we are discussing critical thinking. We're discussing reasoning as something we care about in this class. And to the degree that you care about reasoning, about getting an accurate understanding of the world, your mental health might interestingly get in the way, might be an interesting psychological impediment to your reasoning. Not saying that that's always a bad thing, all things considered. Not saying you should never care about happiness or your mental health over accuracy and the truth and understanding. That is itself an important philosophical topic to be concerned with. But if your primary focus is just on why don't we always reason perfectly, one answer to that is our mind is focused not always on the truth, but our mind is focused on mental health as well. All right, really good class. Appreciate all of your contributions in class today. Thanks for your coin flips. Thanks for doing that poll, all the polls. Have yourselves a good weekend, everybody. No class next week, by the way. Enjoy your Thanksgiving break as well.